What?
Keep it for your self-respect.
A janitor is laughed at for her scars until a veteran saw the unit tattoo. Rosa Martinez pushed her mop bucket through the crowded restaurant, enduring the cruel whispers and disgusted stares that followed her scarred face and twisted leg. The college student saw only a disfigured janitor, someone to mock and dismiss. But hidden beneath her uniform sleeve was a tattoo that told a different story, the insignia of the ADA 2nd Airborne Division earned in the mountains of Afghanistan, where an IED had stolen her beauty, but not her courage. When Staff Sergeant Torres caught sight of that faded ink, he realized they weren't looking at just another cleaning lady, they were staring at a war hero. The lunch rush at Rosario's family restaurant was in full swing, with a clatter of dishes and the buzz of conversation creating a symphony of controlled chaos. Rosa Martinez moved through the dining room like a ghost, her mop bucket wheels squeaking softly as she navigated between tables filled with customers who barely acknowledged her existence. At 38, Rosa carried herself with a careful precision that spoke to years of adapting to a body that no longer moved the way it once had. The left side of her face bore the unmistakable marks of severe burned skin grafts that had healed into a patchwork of different textures and colors. Her left leg, damaged in the same explosion that had scarred her face, caused her to walk with a pronounced limp that made each step a conscious effort. The afternoon crowd was typical for a Tuesday, office workers grabbing quick lunches, elderly couples sharing quiet conversations, and a table of college students who seemed to think their youth gave them license to comment on everything around them. Jesus, did you see her face? One of the students whispered loud enough for Rosa to hear as she cleaned a nearby table. Looks like she stuck her head in a blender. His friends snickered, their voices carrying the casual cruelty of people who'd never experienced real hardship. Rosa kept her eyes down, focusing on her work with the same methodical attention she'd once applied to more important tasks in more dangerous places. "I bet she's on disability," another voice added, "probably faking half of it to get sympathy money." Rosa's grip tightened on her mop handle, but she continued working. She'd learned long ago that responding to ignorance only made situations worse. Better to remain invisible, to do her job quietly, and to remember that these people's opinions couldn't diminish what she'd accomplished or who she truly was. The restaurant's owner, Mr. Rosario, was a kind man who'd hired Rosa despite her appearance, understanding that good workers were defined by their character rather than their looks. He paid her fairly, treated her with respect, and never asked questions about the scars that marked her like a roadmap of trauma. But Rosa knew that to most of the world, she was just another damaged person cleaning up after others, someone to be pitied at best, mocked at worst, and generally ignored. The uniform she wore covered most of her body, including the tattoo on her left shoulder that told a very different story about who Rosa Martinez really was. The harassment escalated as Rosa continued her rounds, the college students emboldened by their audience and their own perceived superiority. Their comments grew louder, more pointed, designed to humiliate rather than simply mock. "Hey, Scarface!" one of them called out as Rosa approached their table to clean the adjacent booth. "You missed a spot over here." He pointed to a perfectly clean section of floor, his friends laughing at what they considered clever humor. Rosa looked at the area he'd indicated, then began mopping it again without comment. "I think she's deaf too," another student said. "Probably why she can't get a real job." "Maybe we should tip her," the ringleader suggested with false generosity. "You know, charity case and all." He pulled out a dollar bill and dropped it on the floor near Rosa's feet. "There you go, sweetheart. Buy yourself a face mask or something." The laughter that followed was sharp and mean, drawing uncomfortable glances from other diners. An elderly couple at a nearby table looked appalled, and a businessman eating alone seemed to be considering whether to intervene. Rosa bent down slowly, her damaged leg, making the movement awkward, and picked up the dollar bill. For a moment, she stood holding it, and the students waited expectantly for her reaction. Tears, anger, gratitude, anything that would feed their need for entertainment. Instead, Rosa folded the bill carefully and placed it in her pocket. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice carrying a dignity that seemed to surprise them. "See," the ringleader said to his friends, "I told you she was grateful. Probably the most money she's made all day." That's when Staff Sergeant Torres walked into the restaurant still wearing his Marine dress blues from a Veterans Day ceremony he'd attended earlier. Torres was a career Marine with 3 deployments under his belt, and he carried himself with the bearing of someone who'd earned respect through service and sacrifice. He'd come to Rosario's for a quiet lunch, hoping to decompress after a morning of speeches and ceremonies. But as he waited to be seated, he couldn't help but notice the scene playing out near the back of the restaurant. A group of young civilians harassing someone who was clearly just trying to do her job. Torres had seen enough bullying in his 20 years of service to recognize it immediately, and his instinct was to intervene. But something about the woman being harassed made him look more closely. She was cleaning methodically despite the harassment, her movements precise and controlled. There was something about her posture, the way she held herself, despite obvious physical limitations, that reminded him of soldiers he'd served with, people who'd been through hell but refused to let it break them. As Rosa reached up to clean a high table, her uniform sleeve rode up slightly, revealing the edge of a tattoo on her left shoulder. Torres couldn't see the full design, but what he could see made his breath catch the distinctive outline of paratrooper wings. "Ma'am," he said, approaching Rosa's position. "Excuse me?" Rosa turned surprised to be addressed respectfully by a customer. When she saw Torres's uniform and rank insignia, her posture straightened slightly, an unconscious response to military authority that she couldn't quite suppress. "Yes, sir." Torres gestured toward her shoulder. "That tattoo, may I ask what unit you served with?" The college students had gone quiet, sensing that something significant was happening, but not understanding what. Rosa hesitated, her hand moving instinctively to cover her sleeve. "I'm not sure what you mean, sir." "Ma'am," Torres said gently, "I'm a Marine. I know military ink when I see it, and I know a soldier when I see one." Rosa looked around the restaurant, aware that their conversation was drawing attention. The students who'd been mocking her moments before were now watching with confusion and growing unease. "Aided Tilak and Airborne," she said quietly. 3 tours in Afghanistan." The silence that followed was deafening. Torres came to attention and rendered a perfect salute, his action so sudden and formal that it seemed to freeze the entire restaurant. Conversation stopped mid-sentence, forks paused halfway to mouths, and every eye in the place turned toward the Marine in dress blues, saluting a janitor. "Staff Sergeant Torres, United States Marine Corps," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the dining room. "It's an honor to meet you, ma'am. Rosa stood motionless for a moment, overwhelmed by the unexpected recognition. Slowly, almost reluctantly, she returned the salute with the precision of someone who'd performed the gesture thousands of times. "Sergeant Rosa Martinez, 82nd Airborne Division," she replied, her voice stronger now. "Retired." The college students looked between Torres and Rosa with growing confusion and embarrassment. The dynamic they'd thought they understood, young, successful students mocking a disabled janitor, had suddenly shifted into something they couldn't comprehend. "Sergeant Martinez," Torres continued, "would you mind if I asked about your service? I served with some 82nd guys in Afghanistan." Rosa glanced around the restaurant, acutely aware of the attention they were drawing. "Sir, I'm working. I don't want to cause any trouble." "Ma'am, you're not causing trouble. These gentlemen here," Torres gestured toward the college students, "were just having a conversation about respect and service. Weren't you gentlemen?" The ringleader, whose confidence had evaporated the moment Torres had saluted, Rosa, stammered, We didn't know she was military." "And that matters how?" Torres asked, his voice taking on the edge that Marines used when they were about to deliver a lesson in consequences. "You think it's acceptable to mock someone's appearance and disabilities as long as they're not a veteran?" "No, sir," another student said quickly. We were being stupid." "Yes, you were," Torres agreed. "But stupidity can be educated. Cruelty is a choice." He turned back to Rosa, his demeanor shifting from stern to respectful. "Sergeant, if you don't mind me asking what happened." Rosa hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. She set down her mop and rolled up her left sleeve, revealing the full tattoo, the distinctive paratrooper wings of the 82nd Airborne, surrounded by deployment ribbons and unit insignia. "IED outside Kandahar 2018, she said simply. "I was a combat medic. We were responding to a call for wounded soldiers when our vehicle hit a roadside bomb." Torres studied the tattoo more closely, recognizing some of the unit designations. "You were with the 1st Brigade Combat Team." "Yes, sir. Charlie Company, 1st Battalion, 504th Parachute Infantry Regiment." Torres's expression shifted to something approaching awe. "Ma'am, I know that unit. They were legends in Afghanistan. Some of the toughest fighting of the war." "We did our job," Rosa said quietly. "Your job," Torres repeated, "was saving lives in one of the most dangerous places on Earth. How many soldiers did you treat?" Rosa looked uncomfortable with the attention, but answered, "I don't keep count, sir. That wasn't the point." "The point," Torres said, turning to address the college students directly, "was service, sacrifice, putting other people's lives before your own safety." He gestured toward Rosa's scars. "These aren't disfigurements, gentlemen. They're proof of courage. Every mark on Sergeant Martinez's face and body represents a moment when she chose to serve something greater than herself." The restaurant had gone completely silent now, with other diners straining to hear every word. Mr. Rosario had emerged from the kitchen, drawn by the unusual scene playing out in his dining room. "Sergeant Martinez," Torres continued, "how many lives did you save during that IED attack?" "Sir, I was unconscious for most of it. I don't really remember." "I do," said a voice from the restaurant's entrance. Everyone turned to see a young man in civilian clothes walking with a slight limp of his own. "I remember everything." The newcomer approached their group with the careful gait of someone still recovering from serious injuries. "Sergeant Martinez, it's me, Private Johnson, Danny Johnson. You probably don't remember me, but—" Rosa's eyes widened with recognition. "Danny, "Oh my God, Danny, you pulled me out of that Humvee," Johnson said, his voice thick with emotion. "The vehicle was on fire. You had a piece of shrapnel in your leg and burns all over your face, but you wouldn't let the other medics treat you until you'd gotten me and Corporal Williams to safety." Torres looked between Rosa and Johnson, understanding dawning on his face. How many soldiers did she save that day? 4, Johnson said without hesitation. 4 of us owed our lives to Sergeant Martinez. She should have gotten a medal for what she did, but the paperwork got lost in the chaos of the attack. The college students sat in stunned silence, the full weight of their earlier cruelty settling on them like a physical burden. They'd mocked a war hero, laughed at scars earned in service to their country, and treated a genuine American hero like she was less than human. Rosa looked around the restaurant, seeing the faces of people who now understood who she really was. But instead of pride, she felt only the familiar discomfort of unwanted attention. "I should get back to work," she said quietly. "No," Torres said firmly. "You should let us buy you lunch." But Rosa's moment of recognition was about to be tested in the most painful way possible. As the restaurant buzzed with newfound respect for the janitor, they'd overlooked the college student who'd started the harassment, stood up abruptly, his face flushed with embarrassment and anger. "This is bullshit," he said loudly, his voice carrying across the now silent dining room. "You expect us to believe that this janitor is some kind of war hero? Come on." Torres stepped forward, his expression darkening. "Son, I suggest you sit down and think very carefully about your next words." "Why? Because you're both in on some scam." The student's voice grew louder, fed by desperation and the need to salvage his wounded pride. "I bet she bought that tattoo at some parlor. Probably got those scars in a car accident and made up this whole military story for sympathy." The accusation hit the restaurant like a bomb. Other diners gasped. Johnson stepped forward with clenched fists, and Torres looked like he was about to demonstrate some Marine Corps combat training on a civilian. But it was Rosa who spoke, her voice quiet, but carrying clearly through the stunned silence. "You're right to be skeptical," she said, surprising everyone. "Anyone can get a tattoo. Anyone can make up stories." The student smirked triumphantly, thinking he'd exposed a fraud. "Exactly. So why should we?" "Which is why." Rosa continued, reaching into her pocket. "I carry this." She pulled out a worn military ID card and handed it to Torres, who examined it carefully before passing it to Johnson. The ID clearly showed Rosa's name rank and unit designation, along with a photo that showed her face before the injuries. "And this," Rosa said, producing a folded document from another pocket. It was her DD-214, the military discharge form that served as official proof of service. The document was worn from handling but clearly authentic, showing her combat deployments and decorations. Johnson studied the paperwork, then looked up at the college student with disgust. "This is a Bronze Star citation. She got it for the action where she saved my life." "Papers can be faked," the student said desperately, but his voice lacked conviction now. "Can they fake this?" Rosa asked, rolling up her pant leg to reveal a prosthetic device attached below her knee. "I lost my foot in that explosion. The VA fitted me with this so I could walk again." The revelation sent shock waves through the restaurant. Rosa had been working on her feet all day, cleaning and mopping, never once complaining or showing any sign that she was dealing with a prosthetic limb. Or this She continued pulling out her phone and showing them a photo of herself in full military gear, standing with her unit in Afghanistan. The woman in the photo was clearly the same person, but younger, uninjured, and radiating the confidence of a professional soldier. The college student stared at the evidence, his face cycling through emotions, embarrassment, shame, and finally, a desperate anger that made him lash out one final time. "So what if it's all true?" he said, his voice cracking. "That doesn't change the fact that you're just a janitor now, a crippled janitor, cleaning up after people like us. All that military stuff doesn't matter anymore." The silence that followed was so complete that the only sound was the hum of the restaurant's air conditioning. Every person in the dining room stared at the young man who just committed social suicide with his words. Torres took a step toward the student, his face a mask of controlled fury. "Son, you just—" "No," Rosa said, holding up her hand to stop him. "Let me handle this." She looked directly at the college student, her scarred face showing no anger, only a profound sadness. "You're right," she said quietly. "I am a janitor now. I clean floors and empty trash cans and do whatever work I can find." The student looked confused by her agreement, unsure where she was going with this. "But you know what?" Rosa continued. "I'm proud of this job. I'm proud of every honest day's work I do, because service doesn't end when you take off the uniform. It continues in whatever way you can contribute to your community." Her voice grew stronger. "I served my country in Afghanistan, and now I serve my community by keeping this restaurant clean and safe for families to enjoy their meals. Both kinds of service have dignity. Both kinds of service matter." She looked around the restaurant at the faces watching her. "The only thing that doesn't have dignity is mocking someone for doing honest work, regardless of what they look like or what challenges they face." The college student stood frozen, finally understanding the magnitude of his cruelty and the character of the woman he'd tried to humiliate. The confrontation reached its climax when Mr. Rosario, who had been watching the entire scene unfold from the kitchen doorway, stepped forward with tears streaming down his weathered face. The restaurant owner, a first-generation immigrant who had built his business through decades of hard work, approached Rosa with the reverence of someone who understood the true meaning of sacrifice. "Rosa," he said, his voice thick with emotion and his slight accent making her name sound like a prayer. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" Rosa looked at her employer with surprise. "Tell you what, Mr. Rosario, that you were a hero, that you served our country, that you—" He gestured helplessly at her scars, her prosthetic, the evidence of sacrifice that she'd hidden beneath a janitor's uniform for 3 years. "Because it doesn't matter," Rosa said simply. "You hired me to clean your restaurant not because of what I did in the Army." "It matters to me," Rosario said firmly. "My son, my Miguel, he served in Iraq. Marines like this gentleman here." He nodded toward Torres. "He came home different, angry, scared, couldn't find work because people saw his problems instead of his service." The restaurant owner's voice broke slightly. "Miguel took his own life 2 years ago. He couldn't find his place in the world after the war." The silence that followed was profound, heavy, with the weight of loss and understanding. Torres bowed his head, recognizing the story that was all too common among veterans struggling to transition back to civilian life. "Rosa," Rosario continued, "you found your place. You found dignity in honest work. You never complained, never asked for special treatment, never let your injuries slow you down. You are what I hoped Miguel could become. He turned to address the entire restaurant, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had earned his position through decades of service to his community. This woman has worked for me for 3 years. Every day she arrives early and stays late. She treats every customer with respect, every task with pride. She has never called in sick, never asked for time off, never done anything but give her best effort to this job. Rosario's eyes found the college student who had started the harassment. And you come into my restaurant and mock her. You think because you have youth and health and privilege that you are better than someone who served your country. The young man tried to speak, but Rosario wasn't finished. You know what makes someone worthy of respect? Character. Service. The willingness to do what needs to be done even when it's difficult, even when no one is watching, even when there's no glory in it. He gestured toward Rosa. This woman has more character in her scarred face than you have in your entire body. Torres stepped forward, his military bearing commanding attention. Mr. Rosario was right, but there's something else you all need to understand. He looked around the restaurant, making eye contact with every diner. Sergeant Martinez isn't just a veteran. She's not just a hero. She's a reminder of what real service looks like. Torres pulled out his phone and began reading from a military database he'd accessed. Sergeant Rosa Martinez, ADA 2nd Airborne Division, Bronze Star with Valor Purple Heart, Combat Medical Badge, 3 Deployment Ribbons Army Commendation Medal with 2 oak leaf clusters. With each decoration, he named the weight of Rosa's service became more apparent. These weren't participation trophies, they were recognition of genuine heroism under fire. The Bronze Star citation, Torres continued, reads, for exceptionally valorous conduct in direct support of combat operations. Sergeant Martinez repeatedly exposed herself to enemy fire to treat wounded soldiers, ultimately saving 4 lives while suffering severe injuries herself. Her actions exemplify the highest traditions of military service. Danny Johnson, who had been listening with growing emotion, stepped forward. She didn't just save my life that day, she saved my future. I'm a teacher now married with 2 kids. Everything good in my life exists because Sergeant Martinez was willing to risk everything to pull me out of that burning vehicle. The college student who had started the harassment looked around the restaurant at the faces staring back at him, faces filled with respect for Rosa and disgust for his behavior. The weight of his actions was finally sinking in. He began, his voice barely a whisper. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Rosa looked at him with the same compassion she'd shown wounded soldiers on the battlefield. Apology accepted. But you need to understand something. This isn't about me. This is about how you treat people. All people. She gestured around the restaurant. Every person in this room has a story. Every person has struggles. You can't see victories you don't know about pain. They carry in silence. The way you treat others says nothing about them and everything about you. Torres nodded approvingly. Sergeant Martinez is right. Military service teaches you that everyone has value, everyone deserves respect, and everyone is fighting battles you know nothing about. Mr. Rosario made a decision that would change everything. Rosa, I want to offer you a promotion. Assistant manager. Better pay, better hours, and the respect you've always deserved. Rosa looked surprised. Mr. Rosario, I don't need. Yes, you do. he interrupted. "And more than that, this restaurant needs you, not just as a cleaner, but as a leader, someone who can teach the rest of us what real service looks like." The entire restaurant erupted in applause, led by Torres and Johnson, joined by every diner who had witnessed Rosa's grace under pressure and her dignity in the face of cruelty. As the applause died down, Rosa looked around at the faces surrounding her, no longer seeing pity or disgust, but respect and admiration. For the first time in years, she felt truly seen, not as a victim or a curiosity, but as the hero she had always been. "Thank you," she said simply, "all of you. But remember, real heroes are all around us doing ordinary jobs with extraordinary character. You just have to look closely enough to see them." 6 months later, Rosario's family restaurant had become something of a pilgrimage site for veterans and their families. Word of Rosa's story had spread through social media and local news, drawing people from across the region who wanted to meet the war hero who had found dignity in service of all kinds. Rosa, now wearing the crisp uniform of an assistant manager, moved through the dining room with the same methodical care she'd once shown as a janitor, but now her role was different. She trained new employees, managed schedules, and most importantly, created an environment where every worker, regardless of their background or circumstances, was treated with respect. The restaurant's walls now featured a wall of service, displaying photos and stories of local veterans, active military personnel, and first responders. Rosa's Bronze Star citation held a place of honor, but it was surrounded by dozens of other stories of quiet heroism and community service. The college student who had harassed Rosa, whose name was Tyler, had become one of the restaurant's most dedicated volunteers. He spent his weekends helping with veteran outreach programs and had changed his major to social work, inspired by Rosa's example of turning pain into purpose. "She taught me that character isn't about what happens to you," Tyler often told people who asked about his transformation. "It's about how you respond to what happens to you." Torres had been transferred to a recruiting station in Los Angeles, but he made it a point to bring every new Marine recruit to meet Rosa. "This is what we're fighting for," he would tell them. "Not just freedom, but the right of good people to live with dignity and respect." Danny Johnson had established a scholarship fund in Rosa's name, providing educational opportunities for children of disabled veterans. The fund's motto, taken from Rosa's own words, read, "Service continues in whatever way you can contribute." But perhaps the most meaningful change was the simplest one. Rosa had learned to accept recognition without shame. The woman who had hidden her service for years now spoke openly about her military experience, not out of pride, but out of responsibility, understanding that her story could inspire others to see veterans, disabled people, and working-class heroes with new eyes. On Veterans Day, Rosa stood before a packed restaurant, no longer the invisible janitor, but a recognized leader whose scars had become symbols of courage rather than objects of mockery. "True service," she told the assembled crowd, "isn't about the uniform you wear or the recognition you receive. It's about showing up every day and doing what needs to be done with dignity and purpose, regardless of who's watching."